Joining us now, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin and Dan Smalls, criminal defense attorney and MSNBC legal analyst. It's great seeing you both. So, Lisa, exactly what are federal prosecutors as far as how did they land on these new charges?
Well, I think, first of all, Jose, there are only certain charges that the federal government can bring. For the most part, murder is something that Dan and I were discussing just before this, is usually prosecuted by state prosecutors, but there are certain exceptions. And one of them is the statute that allows for the prosecution of murder with a firearm. That's because historically, the regulation of firearms has fallen to the federal government because it's an exercise of the Commerce Clause powers, right, to regulate interstate commerce. As for the other charges, some of them here seem like an overreach to me, the two stalking charges in particular. In order to commit stalking under the federal statutes, one of the things you have to do is that the victim has to know and have fear incited in them. Given what we know so far about the interactions between Brian Thompson and Luigi Mangione, it's not clear that...
What did they say? The victim has to know in order for it to be categorized as it being stalking. The victim or victims has to know that fear has been incited into their lives regarding being targeted. Let's listen to this again.
He was being... prosecution of murder with a firearm. That's because historically the regulation of firearms has fallen to the federal government because it's an exercise of the Commerce Clause powers, right, to regulate interstate commerce. As for the other charges, some of them here seem like an overreach to me, the two stalking charges in particular. In order to commit stalking under the federal statutes, one of the things you have to do is that the victim has to know and have fear incited in them. Given what we know so far about the interactions between Brian Thompson and Luigi Mangione, it's not clear that Brian Thompson knew he was being followed. It's certainly not clear that, except for perhaps a split second before he was shot and killed, Brian Thompson knew that he was going to be shot and killed. And that's not what the stalking statutes are really designed to do.
And the reason why that I wanted to emphasize upon that is because of that in which what they've done up here at the Commonwealth regarding Land Between the Lakes, that the whole time that I was contacting an agency with multiple telephone calls that once more was never brought up in court pertaining to the telephone calls. The only thing that was brought up in court was you have made an alleged threat about a darkly complected man, Arabic descent, of him being basically the boogeyman, and that you have sworn off towards either him going to kill you or you going to kill him regarding a duel. That's what I stood in front of a federal judge over in Paducah, Kentucky, somewhere along about 2009. 2010, somewhere around in there. I was put, after I got evaluated and got high marks on my evaluation and being studied by Dr. Dana in downtown Chicago, come back in front of the judge. The judge basically commended me towards what kind of good marks that I'd made, but he did put me on a 2-year probation of me not contacting that agency for the next 2 years. Don't call them, don't send them emails, don't send them smokestack signals, stay away from them. Matter of fact, he said it'd be best that you not even drive up in that area, because if you got pulled over, it could be looked upon as you being violation of your probation. I said, okay, that ain't no problem. I'll stay away from Land Between the Lakes, LBL. And I did. I met that requirement right down to the letterhead. After the probation period had been lifted, I made another telephone call to the agency in a non-threatening form, expressing and explaining to them that all that stuff that had went on in my life up there was going to be publicly known in regards towards what had happened, how it happened, when it happened, and where it happened. Well, that must have really put a burr up underneath somebody's saddle. In the meantime, I was fighting a case myself in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, of a bogus charge, where eventually the state dropped the charges because they realized, hey, we don't have a case here. I mean, he didn't really threaten this Lieutenant Burns. There's no indication of him threatening Lieutenant Burns to do physical harm or hurt to him. So they dropped the charges. Well, after I'd rented out a 3-bedroom house, about 90 days later, I made another telephone call, this time not to the agency, but to a Gary Hawkins that worked for the agency, that was hired in towards something to do with the forest ranger, forest department, agriculture, forest department. Keep in mind, it was Gary Hawkins that had given me his telephone number and told me that at any time that I needed to contact him. Well, I contacted him. I contacted Gary Hawkins, and I basically told Gary Hawkins the exact same thing that I told the agency, which was everything that went on up there. Well, first of all, I apologize for the misunderstanding, and that everything that went on up there was going to be known. Once more, hung the phone up, non-threatening telephone call, did not break no probation violation, and the next thing you know, they've got 2 charges on me for stalking in the 1st degree over 2 non-threatening telephone calls of 1 to 5 years per charge, per telephone call. Keep in mind, there wasn't nothing ever mentioned about multiple telephone calls, that's what I was being reprimanded for in standing in front of a federal judge in 2009 or 2010. Nothing at all come up about multiple harassing telephone calls. It was just that one charge and that one charge alone, that you had made an alleged threat, and you cannot premeditate to murder somebody in the state of Kentucky, because if you do, it's considered a Class C felony. Well, I didn't know that. I didn't know that you couldn't actually open up and say that I support the Bible and I support the things in the Bible, and the Bible says that Satan will come to an end, his existences will come to an end, and that he will be thrown into a prison. And I'm talking about the spiritual Satan. He will be thrown into a prison where he will remain the rest for eternity. Now, the physical Satan, that's where the doomsday devil's duel comes in at regarding the 2 witnesses, if you know anything at all about the Bible. But I was still charged in a line of double jeopardy, because it was Miss Tanya Flemings that come to me, being my public defender, and said, Mr. Jackson, you've done nothing wrong. What they're doing to you is double jeopardy. It's not what you've done, but who you done it to. Well, that emphasizes upon prejudicism, being biased. And the whole time it was them people that was trying to bury me to begin with. You'd have to know the whole story. Those that do know my story, I'm telling you the truth about this. Now listen to some more of this pertaining to these stalking charges. Please listen.
What are the stalking statutes designed to do, and what's the burden of proof for that?
Well, the burden of proof is always beyond a reasonable doubt, right, in a criminal context. But in terms of what the elements are of a stalking statute, you have to, with an intent to harass or kill or injure someone, instill fear in them, and then on top of that, for a stalk.
Now, is one telephone call that was non-threatening deemed as being threatening? No. It was a non-threatening telephone call. But all of a sudden, they backed off the federal charges pertaining to it being a federal park, that by rights I should have stood back in front of a federal judge over if they had anything to stand on. But because they didn't have nothing to stand on, they backed up, they crawfished, and now all of a sudden they're going to take it up onto a state charge towards Gary Hawkins and Lisa Hawkins. And the only reason why Lisa Hawkins got involved was because, once more, she worked for the agency as a dispatcher for law enforcement. I had never even thought about Lisa Hawkins in mentioning any of her name in any of my material. And for these people to have come after me and tried to destroy my life, the way that they did, proof is in the pudding that what they done was illegal. It was illegal, and I never should have had to have went through what I went through, especially on that particular situation. And then I come back home to Tennessee, and because my brother and I is going through World War III down here over a family across the road that's got children, because we was concerned about the children, we made telephone calls to the abuse center in Nashville and the abuse center in Weakley County about this. Well, my brother died. Now I'm grieving. Now all kinds of charges come at me because the attorney that I'd hired didn't let me know when the arraignment that my brother and I originally set up in the courts of state of Tennessee to begin with, and now they come after me and arrest me pertaining to Johnson regarding stalking. Is stalking the same as being concerned about a family? No. Once more, the state of Tennessee has violated my Constitution in saying that I was a stalker. I wasn't stalking these people over here. David and I wasn't stalking these people over here. We was concerned about the children because it was Donald Ridgway that was kicking up all the BS because it was Donald Ridgway's client, renters out here that was doing all this to begin with. But once more, I didn't want to play that game again. The same game that just got to being played up in Kentucky, and because of it, I declared guilty to a charge that I never should have pleaded guilty to. But I knew that if I didn't, I wasn't going to get out of jail, and they was going to keep me in there, and they was going to keep punishing me and punishing me and punishing me over non-criminal offenses. Especially whenever you take under consideration of 3 innocent children. The wool got pulled over my eyes in Kentucky, and then to top it off, here comes Johnson of saying, well, now you're a multi offender, and because of it, that puts you in the category of a federal charge. It's obvious that the laws are very screwed up whenever it comes to them being biased, and whenever it comes to it being a 2 or possibly a 3-tier system based upon whether or not you got any money to pay for good representation. It's obvious that the laws are screwed up whenever it comes to making charges like this. And now on a national level, they're beginning to look at this in a different focus.
Charge, for example, like we have here, than actually commit the crime itself. But critical to the stalking charge is that you are intending to drive fear into the heart of someone, and that you do, in fact, drive fear into that person. It's almost like individualized terrorism.
It's almost like individualized terrorism. There was nothing mentioned about Lisa Hawkins or Gary Hawkins on the multiple telephone calls on the first time that I went in front of a federal judge. Nothing at all. They was wanting to personalize it over the 2 non-threatening telephone calls because I had pissed somebody off. Well, just because you pissed somebody off don't mean that you broke the law. Besides that, if 2 non-threatening telephone calls in the span of a 90-day period is considered harassing or stalking, I think you need to reevaluate what the principles are to begin with pertaining to stalking. Stalking is whenever you are intended to do bodily harm and you have promoted fear in that individual person's heart for some reason. You have directly made a threat to them, and because of it, you have implemented more than just hate, but a criminal offense towards doing bodily harm or death to them. That wasn't my case in Kentucky. And it for darn sure wasn't the case up here across the road pertaining to 3 innocent children. So on both accounts, state of Kentucky, state of Tennessee, illegal actions. And Tommy Moore knows it because it was Tommy Moore that was deliberately pushing that stuff off between Tommy Moore and Mike Wilson, that was pushing it off on one another burning the candle on both ends, playing two ends against the middle, that David and I never could get nothing resolved out here to begin with. And this was after hiring attorneys to have this issue taken care of. Mine is double jeopardy, especially with up in Kentucky, and then with the ordeal that happened in Tennessee, is just another violation that goes to all the other violations that they have been embarked upon towards not wanting to support a ministry that supported peace. There's no other way for me to express and explain these things other than the way that I'm doing it right now.
Danny, so what are these charges? Which of these charges include the possibility of the death penalty?
So you have those under the firearms charge, and this is, as Lisa was saying, there is no general federal murder statute. The federal courts are courts of limited jurisdiction. So if there is a murder case in federal court, there needs to be some additional jurisdictional hook. Here you have the firearms charges, which, I was talking about this with Lisa, to make a federal firearms charge resulting in murder a federal murder crime is basically making a general federal murder statute, because a lot of shootings, a lot of killings are firearm related. So normally, because the federal government is one of limited jurisdiction, these are the kinds of crimes that you might say are usually handled by state courts. Stalking, shooting someone with a gun. Yes, there is an interstate component. Yes, the defendant fled across state lines. So you definitely have those jurisdictional hooks. But the question does arise, is this a case that should have been brought by the federal government? And the specific question is, under DOJ policy called the Pettit policy, is there a substantial federal interest that is vindicated by this prosecution that otherwise would go unanswered by the state prosecution?
And what do you mean? What does that mean?
So, for example, this is something that I imagine DOJ did internally, because that is their policy. It's called the Pettit policy. But they don't have to follow it, and a defendant can't sue to enforce them to follow their own policy. But generally speaking, they have to ask themselves before charging, is there a substantial federal interest that is achieved by these charges? Or would all the things that we need to satisfy justice in our mind be satisfied by a state prosecution? I think reasonable minds could differ on that question.
And guys, from a civilian perspective, what's the difference if you have a murder charge federal and you have one or two or three murder charges state? Where does the overlapping include double jeopardy anywhere?
Absolutely.
It could. It
Absolutely.
definitely could, but sometimes you see...
And that's what they done to me up in Kentucky, because originally, whenever they come after me on a federal charge, because it is a federal park. Once more, I should have went in front of a federal judge, not a state judge such as Judge Woodall. They downsized it. They crawfished. And now all of a sudden, we're going to personalize it like Mr. Jackson was intentionally stalking Lisa Hawkins and Gary Hawkins, that their lives was in dire danger. And that's the way we're going to win over on this case that never should have ever been charged to begin with. Because like I said, I was fighting a case in Oklahoma over another bogus charge of threatening a police officer that I never should have been charged for. Once we went to the prosecuting attorney several different times, they realized that they didn't have a case. So they dropped the charges. I think it took about 6 times. But they dropped the case because they didn't have nothing. I didn't threaten Lieutenant Barnes in Oklahoma. But yet no, all that crap is still on document that you can look up my name, Dennis James Juby Jackson, Juby spelled Jubby at that time. You can look my name up in Oklahoma and you'll see page after page after page of the information that they have put out there to the public to want to smear, character assassinate my character that much more. Telling only part of the story and not the whole story. Oh, it does say that the charges was dismissed, and it does say that Mr. Jackson never admitted to any type of crime. It does say that. But whenever it comes to all the particulars, it don't get into that. It don't get into the particulars about how come the charges was dropped, what was the charge initiated for to begin with. I've got a telephone call of the exact telephone call. Not on manuscript, but on actual audio. Just like I've got a manuscript of the 2 telephone calls that occurred up in Kentucky, with one call being to the agency, the other call being to a personal person that gave me his telephone by the name of Gary Hawkins. And you can read or listen, either or, where they basically railroaded the hell out of me up there in Kentucky. That they was trying to do in Oklahoma, but just so happens I had a good attorney at the time, an Italian attorney at the time, that sat in the corner and fought for me because he knowed that I did not threaten Mr. Burns. Well, now all of a sudden I come back to Tennessee, all hell erupts in our lives. They can't control the situation down here because there's too many people that's involved in the situation down here, and rather than going after the people that's actually committing the crime, they go after the victim, which is me. This was after I'd lost my brother because of all the BS that was going on down here. And now, all of a sudden, Johnson thinks, well, I can get him on this. I can get him on a federal crime because he just got to being charged for stalking, classified as a misdemeanor up in Kentucky, and I'll get him towards a stalking charge over here. Rather than me fight it, because I knowed the game of how that they play dirty, I said, forget it. This ain't worth the fight to me. And I went ahead and pleaded guilty to a charge that I never should have pleaded guilty to. Just like the charge up in Kentucky. I never should have pleaded guilty to that charge because there was no grounds for stalking. I did not threaten nobody. I did not intimately put nobody's life in danger. That's what they're talking about right here. Whenever you classify a stalking, you can stalk a gas station because you need gas put in your vehicle. Well, that ain't stalking as far as an illegal stalking charge act. Anybody can stalk a gas station. Anybody can stalk a hotel room because they need a place to stay. That's not classified as stalking as far as it being a crime. To be a crime, it has to be in the category that you have put people's lives in danger or fear of danger, and they are scared to death of you in some form or fashion. Then is whenever it gets classified over to an actual stalking charge. Let's say it was a disruptive male having problems with marital problems, and he'd done already busted in to his wife or his ex-wife or his whoever, and already put a lot of fear into her life towards threatening her, and then comes back the second time after she'd already put out charges on him about staying away. Yeah, that's considered stalking, because now you have deliberately threatened that individual's life. You have put fear into that individual's life, and because of it, now it should be looked upon as being an actual crime. Stalking a gas station, stalking a hotel is not a crime. That's what they're trying to say here. And there's no way that the individual, going back to this actual case, there's no way that that insurance adjuster had any idea that this individual had drugged this individual out towards basically going to do this type of crime on him. So yeah, murder, yes. But stalking? No, it ain't stalking because the individual didn't know nothing about this individual. You see where they're going with this? Same way with my particular deal that went on in my life up in Kentucky, as well as right here in the state of Tennessee. We've got law enforcement agencies that either don't understand the charges, or they're just deliberately throwing them out there, hoping to make a catch, hoping that whoever that they're after is going to plead out and say, "Okay, I'll plead guilty to this charge," and because of it, now they put it on your record and make you look that much more worser. And once more, they're constantly keeping in America especially, they're constantly keeping a record on each and every one of their citizens. And once that record builds up, then is whenever they can come at you in a different form towards you're a multiple offender over the same charge. That's what they was doing in the state of Tennessee over Johnson, over a particular situation that Judge Tommy Moore and Judge Parm knew exactly that David and I had been struggling out here for 3 consistent years over fighting a bunch of idiots that was coming over to our property, that was challenging us right here in the streets and vandalizing our property and doing all kinds of things to us. They went ahead and went along with Johnson towards, well, we can get him for this charge right here, towards him being a multiple offender. And because of it, I had to plead out on a felony charge. Had never had a felony charge in my entire life. Have I had brush-ins with various law enforcement agencies? Yeah, I have. But it wasn't that I was doing anything to them illegally. It was them trying to bury me. Kind of like whenever I went over here in Kenton, Tennessee in 1983, after my life had been in danger, and I go in there to make a record of it, pertaining to how that I felt like that my life was in danger, because you don't attack somebody that's got 64 staples up and down their belly after that individual just got through losing 9 units of blood, unless you yourself, your life is in imminent danger. You don't treat a patient that way. Well, that's what my father did. He attacked me towards trying to finish me off, even though he was not in any type of imminent danger. I go and explain that over here to Kenton, Tennessee, in front of the mayor, in front of Don Curry, and 2 or 3 other law enforcement agencies, and 2 or 3 other people that works for the agency over there. And the next thing you know, I'm in a round table meeting, discussing all this. And because I mentioned something about the Antichrist, something about the devil, something about Bible prophecy regarding the 2 witnesses that obviously they had no earthly idea about or hadn't studied nothing about, they thought I was Looney Tunes. And because they thought that I was Looney Tunes, and because I was telling people about a miraculous miracle that had happened in my life pertaining to 2 hands that miraculously grabbed both of my wrists, as this 4,000-pound automobile should have cut me in half, because they didn't like me testifying to that, they come after me in Kenton, Tennessee 40 years ago, in 1983. Never, not one time, had been associated with any type of mental health problems whatsoever, ever. And if anybody needed to be put on the carpet regarding mental health problems, it should have been my father, that could not control his anger management issues, that his parenting skills was radical. It was grotesque. It was grisly. That's the name that my father got around in this area towards being grisly, because he had grisly type personas in the way that he wanted to discipline his children. And I was one of his kids, as well as my mother and my 2 older brothers and my younger brother. And a lot of people around here knows these things. They know these things. But because they're cowardly, and because they're not going to come clean, they rather just push it on a rug and hope that this individual called Dennis James Juby Jackson disappears. They want me to basically just walk off into the sunset and become silent. And I'm making videos and telling people about this stuff, which is just irritating the hell out of them. I know it is, especially those people up there in Dresden, Tennessee, that claim that they know all about the law, especially people like out in Land Between the Lakes up in Kentucky that come after me over an illegal act that they was performing, that just irritates the shit out of them, just like them 2 telephone calls that I had made in expressing and explaining to them that I was going to make what that they had done known to the public. And because of it, it just got all over them. Well, we're going to show this individual towards how the cow's going to eat the cabbage. Let's put 2 federal charges on him, giving an arm of the law that much more of a long arm. That way we can cross over state lines and we can go wherever Mr. Jackson is and go grab him up and drag him back here again. And grab him by the shirt collar and tell him that he's not going to expose us this way, that we're going to charge you now with this charge. I have never seen the laws of America be so corrupt whenever it comes to bias, prejudicism. But they do. They do. Just like George Floyd, I guarantee you the ordeal that happened with George Floyd was not something that just happened randomly overnight. George Floyd had probably had lots of different confrontations with that agencies or those agencies around there where whoever that he was dealing with, and he now created a reputation for himself, and now you had different officers out there that was purposely targeting people like George Floyd, that if I ever can get my hands on him for whatever reason, I'm going to make him regret that he ever crisscrossed us. It's called bias. It's called prejudice. And it don't matter. It ain't got nothing to do with color. It's got to do with one's personality and how that they have privatized something on a level of that. And there's probably no doubt. There's probably George Floyd. I haven't studied his case all that deeply, even though I got him out here on a memorial out here. I'm pretty sure that he's had some run-ins with them. And because of it, it creates prejudice. And whenever I say prejudice, first thing that comes into people's minds is, oh, this is about a color thing. This is about a black and white thing. No, just because it's prejudice doesn't mean that it's a black and white thing. That's another misleading factor that the public here in America has been basically misled in.
Sometimes you see a defendant, for example, Jose, who is a defendant in parallel prosecutions, plead out and waive their double jeopardy rights. We've seen that before. There also are circumstances in which the elements of each crime are not substantially similar enough to trigger jeopardy. I'm thinking about David DePape, for example, who is the defendant who was convicted both federally and by the San Francisco District Attorney of that assault and kidnapping on Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul. He will serve concurrent sentences in both federal and state prison, having been tried and convicted in both federal and state courts on different charges.
Right.
And to the extent that double jeopardy was implicated there, at least we haven't had a court ruling yet that says that those series of charges can't coexist because they overlap so much that it would be unconstitutional.
As a defense attorney, what do you go after on that?
So, for example, you're talking about the defense for Mangione has already said in a public statement that they think this raises double jeopardy concerns. I believe it does not. Although, again, people might disagree. You start with Lisa's analysis, and this is called the Blockberger test. The question is, are these two crimes exactly the same? Or does one of them, do they each have some element that the other does not? But even if they are the same, it probably...
Now, they're talking about the Nancy Pelosi deal right now. So don't get that mixed up. They kind of interchange with their conversations, and they immediately start talking about another case, even though it's related.
Probably doesn't matter, because these are two different sovereigns, as we call them. We have a state crime, and then we have a federal crime. And we consider those two different kingdoms. And when that happens, there is almost never any double jeopardy implications, even if the crimes are the same. The Supreme Court just said this in a case called Gamble a couple of years ago, that even if the crimes are the same, because we're talking about separate kingdoms, they can prosecute for the same conduct and probably the same crime, with a couple very narrow exceptions. Double jeopardy, in spirit, I agree with the defense. In spirit, they have a point. Is this a case that should have been brought in federal court? I don't think so. However, they will never be able to raise, I believe, a successful double jeopardy challenge, simply because these are two different sovereigns bringing this case, even if the crimes and the conduct are very similar.
Lisa Rubin and Dennis Wells, thank you very much. It's great seeing you guys in person. Appreciate it. Take a look now at the countdown clock.
So many different entanglements with so many different laws that's contrary to a federal law versus a state law that I guess can be debated until the cows come home, depending upon what you're talking about and what the situation was, and you got to take everything all into account by person case basis, and you got to break it down and look at it. And just like my case, I'm going to roll over to my case again real quick. There had never been any leading factor of me targeting, personalizing any telephone calls, of the multiple telephone calls in the beginning phases of all the telephone calls that was made to the agency, the Land Between the Lakes agency, personalizing those telephone calls in a threatening form towards anybody working for that agency, especially Lisa Hawkins or Gary Hawkins. They brought that out of their own hat. This was after they got me back into the state of Kentucky. And now, personalize it, crawfishing from a federal court down to a state court and minimizing it to a misdemeanor charge. Never should have went in that area. Period. Never should have been in the area of the federal administration or the state entity. And now I come back home, and because somebody had found out about it up here in Dresden, and because I didn't make my arraignment, because the attorney that I hired didn't tell me about the date, plus I was grieving over a dead brother, all of a sudden they decided to jump on me with both feet. They decided that we got him. We can now get him for a multiple offense offender. This is your law that we're talking about. These are the people that's supposed to know the law, even though there was never any type of charge pertaining to the people that was across the road. Anything. There was never any type of charge indicating that I was targeting those people in a threatening or a violent form. If anything, I should have been commended. My brother and I should have been commended because we was concerned about these 3 little children. Which, once more, this all got in the format regarding the Ridgeway case versus the Jackson case, that David and I went to court, hired attorneys, and tried to get it resolved in a legal, peaceful, logical way. They couldn't resolve it. You know why? Because they were showing favoritism. Who was they showing favoritism to? They were showing favoritism to the person that was committing the crime. Coming out here and jerking us off and calling us all kind of names and terrorizing us and tormenting our lives. That the truth be known, it was Donald Ridgeway that should have been charged with some sort of terrorism type crime. This was after that these people had already, we'd gotten successful one time by getting a restraining order on these people, towards these people leaving us alone. But this was something that was drawn out over a period of 3 years. And because it was so extent, and because it was so so real in my brother's eyes and my brother's heart, he couldn't bear it. And I truly believe that out of dereliction of duty up here in Dresden, Tennessee, of them not controlling this situation down here, contributed to my brother's death. In addition to the fact that there was already problems going on down here with my brother and my dad and my other brother with the Ridgeway family and the Jackson family. And here now, Juby comes back, I come back in 2014 in the middle of Hatfields and McCoys, in the middle of a commotion going on, and now I get caught up into the same commotion. So proof is in the pudding in who the perpetrators was that was perpetrating this all along. Now, I can't speak for the cases before my case regarding the problems that was going on with the Jacksons and the Ridgeways before I ever come back here, because I wasn't here. You can go off of hearsay. I can't speak against or for one way or the other. I just know the proof is in the pudding that there was disturbances that was already happening out here way before 2014, way before Dennis Jackson ever decided to pop back up into Northwest Tennessee, where he was originally raised up at all his life. Now, if that's not a letdown coming from the courts, especially after my brother and I put down good, solid, earned money in our defense, trying to handle things in a legal manner, but because Dennis Jackson has already had a couple rumbles with various law enforcement agencies, such as what went on in Kentucky and what went on in Oklahoma, now all of a sudden Johnson, I'm not standing in your corner. I'm not standing in your corner, Juby. Now David, he looked at David, he said, now David, I'll stand in his corner, because David didn't have no charge. He didn't have no record. My younger brother didn't have nothing. But because David was Juby's brother, now, based around being biased, they even let him down. And all this was gnawing on my brother. Because my brother, he knew the facts. He knew the law. He knew the background. He knew about everything. He wasn't ignorant to the facts. And it was overwhelming to him to the point that it had an effect on his health. I'll always believe that. I will always believe that the lack of professionalism coming from the Tennessee courts here in Dresden, Tennessee, had a contributing factor to my brother's death. Good luck to all of us. As I say, in ending, God bless America, God bless our troops, God bless our endeavors. I want to say Merry Christmas to everybody. Even though we're going through troublesome times right now, in regard to response to all this, but I do.
Screen, right there, it's 12 hours and.
I do want to bring this up real quick pertaining to. It seems like that this is deja vu. I think everybody knows what the word deja vu means. In other words, here we go all over again regarding what they're fixing to talk about right here.
They're trying to prevent a government shutdown that happens tonight at midnight, and there you see the clock, 12 hours and 23 minutes until that deadline is reached. The fight over the government funding bill shows the very difficult situation facing House Speaker Mike Johnson. Punchbowl News reports it got so bad during a meeting with lawmakers in his office on Thursday that Johnson said, quote, "If anyone else can get 218 votes, God bless them." That's according to 3 lawmakers that were present at that meeting. With us now, NBC's Ali Vitale on Capitol Hill, former Pennsylvania Republican Congressman Charlie Dent, and Megan Hayes, former special assistant to President Biden.
Now, if people are wondering, especially those that are associated with government, don't matter if it's state government, local government, federal government, whatever, here in the United States, if they're wondering what has been the pushing fact of the reason why the American people has lost confidence in our judicial system, this is just another example of it pertaining to how come people does not trust the American government. Because they can't come together and they can't look at things from a wider lens and saying, well, we need to do this for the betterment of the good pertaining to the people. I said and started saying, I guess now it's been at least 5 years ever since Donald Trump was president, was basically whenever I got online good pertaining to my social media, Facebook and YouTube, I started saying then that there was no way that they could redeem the American people pertaining to this travesty that has happened of us being trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars in debt other than to default. That would be the answer. But why they want to keep dragging this on and bringing this up again and going through the same old routine, I think it's evil. I think it's evil, and I don't think it's in the interest of the American people. And I think that they're deliberately doing this, knowing that they have failed, knowing that if they do have to default and start all over again, there's going to be major repercussions toward whether or not we're supposed to use the same name under the same entitlement pertaining to the same, basically the same flag, the same American flag. Because whenever you go bankrupt in a company, ordinarily you either change the person that belongs to the company or you change the company's name to keep the company still up and going. One or the other. And in order to default and start all over again, I think by legal rights, of course this ain't really got nothing to do with my personal stance pertaining to my calling with God, but I think that by legal rights you would have to create a whole new regime. And in that regime change, you would have to create some sort of new image. Kind of like filing bankruptcy on a business. That's my personal opinion about it. Now, you can take it for what it's worth, of whether or not that I'm hitting high or low here, but to me, if you do default, everything gets changed. You can't just change part of it. You can't just wave and say, well, we no longer owe this money and we're still going to keep going like we're going. You know, that's kind of like Russia. Whenever Russia defaulted, I think it was in 91, they're no longer considered Russia, but now they're considered a federation. Their name changed. I don't know if their flag changed. I don't know that the people changed, but I do know that the name of their country changed. It's no longer considered Russia, even though people still use the name Russia. It's kind of like whenever Zuckerberg decided he was going to change Facebook over to that other iconic look, people still use the name Facebook. But legally, if you're going to do a change, you have to change the name or the look of the name. That's the way I understand the law now. I may be wrong.
And former White House Director of Message and Planning. So, Ali, what's the latest there now? There's always movement, but sometimes that movement doesn't get to much.
We'll see if this amounts to anything, but there's definitely movement, and we've moved beyond concepts of a plan to a seemingly firmer strategy here for the Speaker's Plan C, I guess we'll call it. We're hearing now from sources that have been in the room shuttling in and out with the Speaker all day that they are going to vote or try to vote on a multi-pronged plan that basically separates out all the different aspects of this funding fight into their own separate bill and their own separate vote. So what we're hearing right now is that there would be one vote on the ag and farm bill extension pieces of this. There would be another vote on the continuing resolution itself, the thing that would keep the government open until mid-March. Then there would be another vote on the disaster relief portion. And what it leaves out is that there would not be a vote on the debt ceiling or debt limit piece of this. That's the very thing that Trump and Musk themselves scuttled this entire first Plan A over in the first place. So that does present the question, will they be happy with this? But I will tell you that removing the debt ceiling piece could placate Democrats who feel like they got the wool pulled over their eyes with the first iteration of this deal being completely trashed in real time earlier this week. But it also could placate those 30 some odd Republican members who in part voted against the version of the bill yesterday because they didn't want to see the debt ceiling raised in that fashion. But also, these are many of the same members, Jose, who don't vote for continuing resolutions anyway. So it's imperative for Republican leadership to get Democrats on board. That's despite the fact that Congresswoman Luna said this morning. Watch.
We're not cutting deals with Democrats. We're going to work it out here. I do not believe the government's going to be shutting down, but you guys will see some great stuff, very similar to President Trump's plan yesterday.
We expect, though, that Republicans will huddle amongst themselves. Stop me if you've heard this one before. At some point in the next few hours, likely this afternoon, that would happen before we see any kind of vote here on Capitol Hill. And despite what Congresswoman Luna is saying there, which is no votes from Democrats, no open lines of communications, the top Democrat, Hakeem Jeffries, says that the lines of communication are now reopened. So we'll see if that ends up bearing fruit.
So, Ali, and we're talking 12 hours and 20 minutes to go, but who's counting?
Yeah.
Everybody. But let's talk about the different options, because if it is a truly just CR, just to keep things going until the 14th of March, and then you separate the ag bill, the disaster bill, and does that make it any different for Democrats that are seeing what's going on inside the Republican camp?
Look. I'm gonna voice my opinion about this one more time, and then I'm gonna shut up about it because I got things to do. It was Donald Trump and Elon Musk that basically throwed a monkey wrench into the works that caused all this to basically symbolically blow up. Donald Trump and Elon Musk didn't just come into the alignment of our government affairs overnight. Donald Trump knew that he was becoming a president of the United States to a country that was already trillions and trillions of dollars in debt. Don't put it off like, well, I didn't know. Well, you did know. You knew exactly what you was getting into before you ever got into it. What Donald Trump is wanting to do is slip out of the controversy because he knows it's going to take up a great deal of his time in focusing in on other matters. But what he's wanting to do is basically push this off and go ahead and get this done. That way, it'll basically put him on easy street until the latter part of his presidency towards having to deal with it again. Which, once more, this is a ball and chain as far as I'm concerned. It is a burden that has been placed upon to the American people to the extent that now it's become an infliction. Kind of like a disease, kind of like a cancer, kind of like the plague. It's an infliction. And in the extent of this infliction, it's causing thousands, if not millions of lives and being destroyed because they're not handling this properly up on top of the hill. Once again, I'm not a lawyer in all this. I'm not no government strategist whenever it comes to strategizing a government in the right way. But if you ask me, you know, the proof is in the pudding that we went beyond the Rubicon of being able to repair the system. So if you're not going to repair the system, the next thing is to replace the system. What do you replace the system with? That's the $64,000 question. That's where they should be initiating their time and their effort towards. Okay, we're going to have to break it down. We're going to have to collapse this system and re-engineer a brand new system. How are we going to do it? And what kind of name are we going to put on it? Or is it still going to be called America? Or is it going to be called America Plus? Or is it going to be called America 2? Are we going to keep the name? Are we going to keep the flag the same thing, red, white, and blue flag? Are we going to add another star to it? Are we going to shorten the stars, or do this or do that? All these are questions that should be in the works right now, rather than doing what they're doing that they've continued to keep doing for the past 10 years, or maybe longer in extending the debt ceiling. Because there's no doubt the way that they're going at this right now, with the cutting out on the medical cancer research and cutting out on the farmers. You know, my grandmother used to always say that if the farmers fail, we all fail. And a farmer can fail in more ways other than not getting enough rain or getting too much rain. Of course, some of these farmers have brought this upon themselves by reaching out with their eyes and basically trying to keep up with the Joneses and trying to grow too quick, and went out here and bought a bunch of equipment and a bunch of brand new stuff that they really didn't have to have at that particular time. Some of these farmers have been very poor businessmen in that perspective. And people has to admit to that. Yeah, it looks good to have a brand new John Deere combine sitting on your lot somewhere worth $750,000. Yeah, it looks good for you to drive a brand new Ford or a brand new whatever every year towards you being a good, successful business person. But are you really a good, successful business person, or are you just imitating the look of being a good business person whenever it comes to buying all this equipment and having to drive a brand new vehicle every other year or every year? There you go there. I'm going to end it at that. Say good luck, God bless, Merry Christmas, and heaven please help us all, especially whenever it comes to all the intolerablenesses that's going on all over the planet right now regarding the wars and the conflict and the problems that we're seeing only escalate even over in the Middle East. One day we think that we're close to a resolution, and the next thing you know, it all blows up, and now we got to start all over again. Or the deal with Ukraine and Russia. That's another ordeal that's just, it's an infliction. It is an infliction upon to society that causes harm and hurt and destroying lives. God bless.